and because we have many, many people on the web seminar, we ask that you submit your questions through the question box, which you should see on the right side of your screen. And there are two folks from the Lilly Family School with Una who will be watching those questions as they come in and group them together, and during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation, they will be reading them aloud so that everybody hears the question, and then Michael and Una will be responding to those questions. And this web seminar is being recorded, so we will happily send you a link as soon as we have it ready for publication, which should be probably Monday. And if we don't get to all of the questions, we will keep track of those and do a Q&A sheet of sorts and send that out to everybody who's on today. So with that, I will ask Una to begin.
Good afternoon to everyone and welcome. I want to start with a note of thanks to Marks and Lundy for this unique opportunity and the partnership that we've enjoyed over the past year in developing the index and also the context around the Outlook. I'd also like to thank my colleagues here at the Lilly Family School. This was really a long-term effort to develop the Outlook, but also to connect with a number of others who are working in the field on this topic. Right here in the room with me, I have Melanie McKittrick and John Bergdahl, who worked very closely on the project, but we also have a larger team that was involved, and those individuals are detailed in the report as well as in this webinar. I want to single out the contributions of our advisory council. We benefited from their expertise. It was a very significant group of both scholars and practitioners who reviewed the material and provided their insights. So with that, I'd like to get started on our presentation today. So very quickly, we provide an overview of the research team. You'll see that we had several economists and statisticians involved, but we also drew on an external advisory council that was composed of both scholars and practitioners, and that full list is also in the report. All right, before we begin, let's start setting the stage and a bit of context for the Philanthropy Outlook. As many of you on this call know, there are more than 1.4 million nonprofits in the United States today. About 2/3 of them are 501c3 organizations. Beyond that, we know that nonprofits play a central role in economic and social life in the United States, influencing work done in education, healthcare, fields as diverse as disaster relief, the arts and culture, and so many other areas, including international affairs. Philanthropy plays a critical role in nurturing the growth and sustenance of the nonprofit sector. And what we at the Lilly Family School realized, along with many others in the field, is that as the nonprofit sector has grown, there has not been a growth in data sources and information to actually help inform and guide decision-making in the field. And so despite the growing importance of philanthropy in our society and globally, we have not seen an increase in the data sources that are available that track and measure growth in the sector. I also want to add that big data, the word big data is something we hear a lot today, and it's driving change in the healthcare field, in sports and entertainment, in marketing, and so many other fields. And one goal of the Philanthropy Outlook is to help inform and guide decision-making in philanthropy. Okay, so in terms of what we will do today, what we'd like to do is share with you some of the big picture findings from the Philanthropy Outlook, but also tell you a little bit about how these numbers were generated. As many of you know, the last few years have been a period of significant economic and financial volatility in the U.S. The U.S. economy is now starting to recover from the deep impact of the Great Recession, which started in late 2007 officially, but really going into 2008 and 2009. With this volatility, this creates a lot of interest in how the economy is shaping the philanthropic environment. And we'd like to say in introducing the Philanthropy Outlook that this report provides information that no other report has done before, in the sense that we provide projected growth rates for philanthropy in future years, 2015 and 2016, but also provide the context for those numbers, providing detailed information on the specific data points that correlate with the prediction. And this depth of information and the transparency with which we provide this information to the general public is actually a departure from what has been done in the field. The goal is to provide timely information that's research-driven, but is as accurate as possible. So today what we'd like to share with you are the predictions for the year-to-year growth for the years 2015 and 2016. We'll specifically focus on overall U.S. giving, as well as giving by individuals, foundations, estates, and corporations. The goal of each of these areas is to provide an overview of what's happening in that specific donor type, but also a contextual analysis so that those of you who are listening today can understand the factors that are driving trends in those fields. So with that, I'd like to start sharing a bit of how the Philanthropy Outlook was developed. So to develop the Philanthropy Outlook, we actually we started with theoretical models of the factors that affect giving, and we tested various models, literally hundreds of variables against many different models. Keep in mind that because we're predicting for 2015 and 2016, we have to actually figure out what the underlying variables that will drive giving in those years. And we tested those models very rigorously to ensure that they were valid and that they also were grounded in economic theory. With this in mind, we developed specific models for each giving type, giving by individuals, giving by estates, as well as giving by foundations and corporations. Now, because this is essentially projecting into the future, and none of us have a crystal ball, so the goal is to be as accurate as possible, and there's several factors that play into accurate projections. First, the number of projections that are being made, as well as any unpredictable events that can affect the stability of the underlying variables that were projected. I should also note that the types of approaches we're using in developing the outlook build on existing models of projections that have been in existence beginning in the early 20th century. And along with other research entities, what we plan to do is test these models over time to ensure their continued accuracy. Now, going on to the next set of findings for the outlook, I'd like to share just the first overall finding. The models predict here is that philanthropy is projected to grow 4.8% in 2015 and 4.9% in 2016. What factors underlie this growth is what we'd like to spend perhaps a few moments of your time talking about. The most significant variables in affecting the outlook for overall giving are changes in the S&P index, so changes in the stock market over time. And what we project are these increases in the stock market over time will lead to higher growth rates in overall giving. In addition, we've also incorporated above average increases in personal income, overall, as well as nonprofit net worth. So those are the three variables that are driving the overall projected increase of 4.8% in 2015 and 4.9% in 2016. Now, I'd like to turn your attention to specifically the perhaps one of the most important areas which we have investigated. As many of you know, we do not just look at the overall growth rate for the sector, but we're going to look at where that growth is going to come from, and specifically the contribution of individuals, foundations, corporations, and estates. Just want to point out that the lion's share of giving comes from individuals. Many of you who follow the sector year after year will not be surprised by this finding, but I want to just draw your attention to the 70% figure there. Many of you are aware that on average, nearly 3/4 of all giving historically has come from individuals. You'll notice that this trend is slightly downward with 70%, still the lion's share of overall giving coming from individuals. The second largest share, an area that has been growing rapidly over time, is the role that foundations play at about 15.3%. And when we look at foundations, you may ask, what about the subcomponents? Operating foundations, independent foundations, community foundations, and so forth. And we can certainly visit that topic in our discussion period. But keep in mind the second largest share is coming from foundations of all types, family foundations certainly making up more than half of that overall 15%. The next largest slice can be attributed to estates. To make this very clear, separate from the terms you may be familiar with, we call these estates because the years in which those estates close can also affect the size of the contributions that estates make. In other words, charitable bequests vary significantly from year to year, and so with that variability in mind, the giving by estates is about 10%, roughly, slightly under 10%. And you may note that the corporate giving component is relatively constant across those 2 years at about 5% of the overall amount. Now, when we turn to 2016, the trends I just want to point out very quickly, giving by individuals is still close to 70%, but it's slightly down, with foundations picking up about 15.7%. The next largest component is giving by states, 9.4%, and corporate giving about 5.4% of the total. Now, these are areas that we're watching very closely because each of those giving types has its own separate model, its own separate set of variables that drive giving. And with that in mind, I'd like to turn our attention now to each specific donor type, and we'll start with what we project for overall giving, and specifically how these recent projections compare with what we've seen in recent years. So to present a bit of that historical narrative and background, I just want to point out that during the 1970s and early 1980s, we saw about a 2% growth in overall philanthropy. Much of that reflects the underlying economic variables of the time, the 2 recessions in the 1970s, a period of a lot of economic volatility, many of you may recall. The 1990s were a period of significant economic growth and prosperity. Often when we look back, as many of you know, this was a period where we did not have very significant downturns. And the point that I typically make when I look at this data is that was when I was in graduate school. And actually, macroeconomists at the time said that we had been successful in smoothing out the economy and avoiding these deep troughs that we had seen in previous years. Well, we now know that wasn't actually accurate because, as you know, the Great Recession was the most significant downturn that the United States and, in fact, the global economy has seen since the Great Depression. And so you can see that we had very slow growth rates for philanthropy in the period following this prosperity period in the 1990s. So in comparison, what we're seeing in the Philanthropy Outlook suggests that the economy is starting to recover, and with that we're starting to see philanthropy grow significantly, especially when viewed in the light of the numbers during the Great Recession. Now, when we compare those numbers to what we saw in the 1990s, perhaps the Philanthropy Outlook looks more moderate when we compare it with those growth rates experienced in the 1990s and early part of 2000. All right, we presented the same information that was just shared, but just to put this in context, we've also adjusted for inflation. And the purpose of doing this is to, again, provide a bit of a context for the numbers in the Philanthropy Outlook. Specifically, when compared to the period of the Great Recession, these numbers seem quite optimistic, but when viewed against a period of significant prosperity, the 1990s, we do not look as optimistic. In fact, what the Philanthropy Outlook numbers suggest more of a moderate, perhaps, growth rate. When we compare this to what we saw in the 1970s, it's Again, slightly better, but keep in mind the 1970s were a period of slow and uneven growth and significant volatility in both the U.S. economy as well as the global economy. So with this context and stage setting in mind, let's turn to now look specifically at the projections by donor type and by specific area of philanthropy. And we'll start by looking at giving by individuals. For many of you who have followed trends over time, as noted, individuals account for the lion's share of all philanthropy in the U.S. And so it's not surprising that we are spending a great deal of attention here. The predicted growth for individuals is 4.4% in 2015 and 4.1% in 2016. The specific factors that will significantly influence individual giving in 2015 include projected growth in personal income. Many of you will not be surprised by this finding. Our models over time have shown that economic and financial security are perhaps the most significant drivers of changes in philanthropy over time. In addition, we note that above average projected growth in household net worth as well as nonprofit net worth are important drivers of this trend. I should also note that the predicted growth in giving by individuals is more than 1% percentage point higher than the historical average. In addition to the factors that we've mentioned here, the above average expected growth in the S&P 500 contributes to this higher than average performance for individual giving. When we talk about individual giving, it's important to note that individual giving actually includes two components. Contributions from households who itemize their charitable contributions following tax day. I'm sure that's a very salient point. But it also includes contributions from those who do not itemize, broadly called non-itemizers. Many of these individuals tend to take the standard deduction, and that's the bulk of American households according to the data. Only about 30% or a third of Americans itemize. Compared to prior years, we note that the percentage of giving by non-itemizers is predicted to be lower, accounting for less than 10% of giving in both years. In contrast, giving by non-itemizers has actually generally fluctuated between 15 and 20% of the total over the last 2 decades. Now, you may ask why the predicted sort of decline in terms of the contributions from non-itemizing households. This can be traced to predicted increases for the itemized givers. In other words, itemized giving is expected to increase much more rapidly in contrast to giving by non-itemizers. So that's what accounts for some of the changes that we're seeing, and that's actually a deeper dive investigation into the data that you see in front of you. So that's our prediction, our projection for individual giving. As we said, the main drivers, just to quickly recap, if you want to see what's driving giving in this donor type, you'll be watching trends in personal income as well as looking at what's taking place with household portfolios, their wealth levels, as well as nonprofit net worth. Now, looking by order of importance, we now turn our attention to foundations, giving by foundations. And here we have some very interesting findings. Suggestions this may seem quite in line with what we've seen in recent years. Giving by foundations is predicted to increase by 7.2% in 2015 and by 6.7% in 2016. The specific factors that are driving and influencing foundation giving over time in these years, in 2015 and 2016, once again, we expect that the stock market will play a significant role in driving giving by foundations, but also the overall economy plays a significant role, and specifically watching trends in GDP over time. Now, giving you a bit of an in-depth look at those numbers, the trends in the current year S&P affect giving in future years, as many foundations typically budget their current year grant making on the growth of previous year's assets. So in general, what we would expect is that above average growth in the S&P in 2014 and 2015 will have a positive impact on foundation giving in 2015 and 2016. So past trends in the S&P tend to affect future giving by foundations. Broadly speaking, trends in GDP reflect a growing economy. And this is something that we have certainly seen in our research over time, that philanthropy reflects underlying economic trends. And to the extent that prior year's GDP is linked with current year grant making, this reflects growing assets and a strong financial and economic picture facing foundations. Therefore, increases in GDP in 2014 and 2015 will positively influence giving by foundations. Now, I should mention another point that we have spent a lot of time reflecting on and analyzing is how foundation giving is correlated with the underlying economy. We also note that giving by foundations tends to be counter-cyclical. In other words, some donor types actually scale back their giving in difficult times, but we've seen that foundations have a tendency to actually increase their giving during difficult times. And so we may find that as household net worth fluctuates, that may induce some foundations to change their giving pattern. All right. Now, as we talk about foundations, I'd like to now turn our attention to giving by estates. That's the next largest slice of the overall philanthropy landscape. And so as we turn to giving by estates, I should mention that there has been a lot of interest in what's going to happen to giving by estates over time for several reasons. First, there have been significant policy changes in this area over time. And secondly, many of us are aware of the demographic changes in our economy with aging households, many households leaving the workforce, going into retirement, and a significant conversation about the implications of the significant cohort that will be targeting or will be looking at estate planning over the next few years. So with that context in mind, I'd like to provide a bit of a narrative around our projections for giving by estates. So what we find is that giving by estates is predicted to increase by 2.7% in 2015 and by 6.3% in 2016. And I should also note that giving by estates is by far the most volatile component of the philanthropic landscape. We tend to see significant year-to-year variation in estates depending on large estates closing. And so with that variability in mind, the main factor that we see affecting estate giving over time is growth rates in the S&P 500. And here, there's actually a weaker correlation than we see in the other subsectors of giving and the other donor types that we investigate. In addition to the S&P and its influence, we also look at the impact of household assets overall on estate giving. And so here, average projected growth in household and nonprofit net worth also has an impact on giving by estates. So to give a bit more context, the factors that we've mentioned do account for a majority of the predicted growth in estates over the period. We also look specifically at the role that interest rates on government securities and other economic factors will play in driving or influencing estate giving over the next few years. We also want to emphasize that giving by estates does fluctuate wildly and widely from year to year, and this variance can mostly be attributed to very large estates. And in any given year, we may have one or two of those mega bequests, as we call them, that can actually influence the direction of change. And further, having one very large estate in one year can actually affect growth rates for future years as well. Turning our attention to the next donor type, which is giving by corporations. This is also an area where there's significant interest because we've seen a lot of change beginning with the Great Recession. Many corporations, both large corporations as well as small and medium-sized corporations, looking closely at their approach to corporate philanthropy. Some firms are becoming much more strategic in how they approach their giving. Many firms are seeking creative partnerships with nonprofits of all sizes, looking around perhaps cause marketing, in-kind donations, and many more opportunities, non-traditional partnerships with nonprofits. Some corporations are also leveraging skill-based volunteering as well as other newer approaches to philanthropy. We're also seeing for some of the largest corporations a shift from perhaps a more place-based approach to philanthropy to a much larger and broader, in some cases global, approach to philanthropy. And so with that in mind, I'd like to quickly provide an overview of the projections. For 2015, giving by corporations is predicted to increase by 6% in 2015 and by 4.8% in 2016. The specific factors that will influence corporate giving in 2015 and 2016, first, projected growth in GDP overall is likely to influence corporate giving. And we also note the importance of corporate savings in influencing giving by corporations. Now, taking these points and presenting a bit of a deeper dive into them, I'd like to summarize by saying projected average growth in the S&P, as well as additional factors such as growth in consumer sentiment and consumer behavior, consumer confidence more broadly, will also influence corporate giving in 2015 and 2016. We note that in the past few years, there's been significant variation in employment. In other words, some firms have increased their labor force following the Great Recession, and many firms have still been reluctant perhaps to change or to hire following the Great Recession, given the significant uncertainty that still exists in the economy. And so what we note is that there seems to be certainly a relationship between giving and the underlying economic variables that are facing corporations. I should note that in this model, we emphasize the role that corporate savings play. Corporate savings specifically are defined as corporate profits, net taxes, and dividend payments. Corporate savings are actually quite similar to corporate profits, but here we actually take out the effect of taxes and dividend payments. And here we find that growth in corporate savings, similar to what you would expect, actually positively influence corporate giving. In contrast, some of the variables around corporate giving may have a different impact on overall giving. We should note that many companies increasingly are using their philanthropy in a broad way, in some ways, to position themselves better in the marketplace as a marketing mechanism. And so as current profits increase, the need to use philanthropy as a marketing device may change. And as the economy becomes stronger, demand may also change. And increased demand for corporate services, goods and services, may also change the liquidity of that company and the available assets for contribution. So in summary, what we're projecting for corporations is a more complex picture depending on a number of macro-level variables, such as the GDP growth rate, but also some firm-specific variables, specifically how that company is faring in light of the economy, and specifically growth rates in corporate savings. Now, to turn to our next slide, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Michael, who's going to walk us through his reflections on the findings and also bring in the practitioner perspective, his take on this data, how it can be useful to nonprofit leaders and practitioners as well as fundraisers. So Michael, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Una. I love economists. I love the way economists talk, and they have a way with words and a way of conveying information. And Una, of course, epitomizes that. And the truth is, I love Una too. I say good morning to all of those on the West Coast, and good afternoon to all of those in the other time zones. I'm sitting on the beautiful campus of the University of Kentucky as I speak, where the dogwoods and the tulips, it is a crystal clear spring day, perhaps a day that everybody in Kentucky has been waiting for, and all I can tell you is that I hope it's as beautiful as it is where you are. I speak also for all of the entire team of Martz and Lundy. We have been working together on figuring out the manner in which the Philanthropy Outlook would be used in practice. And I also want to thank Una and the University of Indiana and the Lilly School. It's just been a terrific collaboration, and I think that this is an important aspect for the profession. I want to start out by saying that we might be looking at what Una just said and say, oh, well, you know, 5%, well, no big deal. And I want to take a little issue with that right up front, and that the mass of philanthropy in the United States, I looked it up, is akin to the 17th largest GDP of countries in the world. At 350 billion plus, this is the equivalent of the economy of South Africa, for instance, right around that area. And I think they mine diamonds there. And then I also want to say that a 5% growth at something that large, of course, turns into billions of dollars. And let's remember that that if the GDP of the United States were growing at 5%, we would consider it robust. And of course, we've been living with growth rates of 2 or 3%. So I just want to communicate that this is a big deal. This isn't moderate. This is I think a state of affairs that's really important. There's a way that I want to talk about in my slide, next slide, what I call famous forecasts. And I know I use the word famous forecast because there's nice alliteration there. And Outlook is a chosen word here that's a little different than forecast. But let's talk about weather forecasting for a minute. And this is just the point of how do we dare use this Outlook in real life? And I just want to show how we use some other forecasts that bring meaning to our lives. Weather forecasting in a 24-hour period, when weather is predicted 24 hours before, still with satellites in the air and monitors on the ground and computers and models and everything else right now, is 70% accurate, 70% in the 21st century. Hasn't changed much since the 1920s when they used to sit on farms and pass information along. But still, at 70%, we rely on that forecast and we look at it every day and we decide whether or not to take our umbrella. And we take our umbrella when the rain is forecast, and just in case, you know, with the probability that it will rain, but we're better off with it than if we didn't have it. So we live with a forecast like that all the time. Another famous forecast at the turn of this century was Y2K, and I went back and sort of had to grab an interesting example, and many of us would have forgotten about Y2K. And I remember being at a New Year's Eve party at 12 o'clock that night and wondering if the lights were going to go out, and all of a sudden we were going to be thrown into the darkness, and that the end of civilization would be near, and of course nothing happened. But as we think about the Y2K forecast through the rearview mirror, what actually happened in 1997 and 1998 and 1999 was a tremendous amount of work that went in to prevent it. And of course, the doomsdayers had it one way. All the work was done, and the forecast or the prediction probably helped something not happen that we would otherwise not have been prepared for. So the current most famous forecast, I think, is climate change. And I know climate change is a political football, and I'm not going to be taking any statements or sides on the issue. But one of the things that's interesting to me about climate change is that the manner in which different countries and different sectors are responding. and I think of the government and the country of Germany. Germany now, on the basis of the prediction of climate change and for lots of other reasons, derives 40% of its energy from non-petroleum sources. And most of it is solar. And what's so interesting to me about this, the adherence to the prediction and 40% of electricity in Germany being produced by solar energy, is that the sun doesn't shine very much in Germany. And yet they have taken this seriously, and they are moving along, and they are using that forecast to change society and to change the manner in which they live. And I don't know that the Philanthropy Outlook quite rises to that level, but I just wanted to share with you how I see that we use forecasts all the time. And I think that they often are clear in the rearview mirror. They may not be particularly clear in the moment. They're not stunning, but I also think that these are incremental, and that they require constant monitoring, and it brings in the whole issue of metrics and measurement. And I believe that the plan with the Philanthropy Outlook is to keep monitoring it and to keep measuring it. And I also think that it causes us to say, okay, with this in hand, what can we do? Today's world, as Una opened, is about data and big data. And watching the Masters with all the IBM ads, there were constant references to this. It was fascinating to me and how big data is affecting our lives. And in some development shops, big data is starting to make a difference as well. But you're going to find more and more and more and more that undergraduate degrees in analytics, undergraduate degrees in data interpretation, there's going to be this manner of encroachment. And the nonprofit world is interestingly slow to adapt. And I don't know why. I could name any number of inventions and innovations over the last 20 or 30 years, prospect screening, capacity analysis, and the like. And when it first comes out, the first belief is, nah, let's just keep going and do what we know. And I think actually in the big data realm that this will come and catch up with the development profession faster than we may think. And I think it's starting to appear now. And interestingly, I've even picked up a little bit of controversy as to whether or not these issues of metrics and measurement and monitoring and big data are good for the business. But I think that ship has sailed, and I think that there is a recognition, especially of the more advanced operations, that this is a tool, and it's a very valuable tool. It might be the most valuable tool that's come along. Our donors are very quick to adapt. They use these forecasts, and they use these tools in their lives and in their businesses. And I think that they expect us to adapt as well. And I've used the Philanthropy Outlook now in a number of occasions at board meetings and at larger presentations. And I can tell you that trustees love data, and they use it all the time. They expect to have data. I was just with the president of University of Kentucky today, and he said, "Where's the data?" And all I can tell you is that the data now that is in the Outlook, I think, will be of interest and of importance and value to the governing bodies and to the media and to the nonprofit world. Lori, please. So I'm a hopeless strategist, and I think of the ways that there are implications here for the Philanthropy Outlook. I want to start out by talking about the difference in viewpoint and the manner in which we talk about the money we spend to raise the money that we raise, I want to distinguish between the difference between investment and expense. I know that we're always hounded by expense, and expense is we live with it. We live in fear of it. We're guided by it. Our CFOs ask about it all the time, and trustees ask about it all the time. And yet, there are very few places where, and this is the norm now, where you can put down 20 cents or 25 cents in investment and reasonably expect to get $1 back. And the moment institutions start talking about philanthropy as investment rather than as expense, that's when the game changes. And I know that might be a sleight of hand, and but I offer you that is a breakthrough for many institutions when they finally realize that, gee, if I invest a little more, I'm going to raise more exponentially. 20 cents for a buck, that's almost an exponential exchange. I will say that one of the things that the campaign, that the Philanthropy Outlook gives is it says that the coast is clear, it's safe to come outside, there's been a lot of campaign planning that has gone on since the end of the recession. I think it's safe to say that this is another tool and another conversation that says, hey, let's go. And I think that the common sense and history says that usually in the 2 years of a presidential election that things stay pretty stable. There's lots of reasons here to think that this is going to be a particularly good time. And right now, if smaller institutions, for example, have been thinking about getting into the game, the startups or those that are under-resourced and they want to put more money in, this may be the time. And I think it's a signal to them. I was just with an institution in New York which is raising $1 million a year, spending about $750,000 a year to raise that. We demonstrated capacity in the $15 million range. They had 2 people working on it, and they decided to put 5 people on that based on that prediction and on that capacity. Actually, the Philanthropic Outlook was one of the things that they decided upon. In much larger shops, and I emphasize much larger, what we're looking at here is $1 million on additional on every $20 million of gift revenue. It is at that point in the $1 million category that you start adding people. So 20 million, 40 million, 60, 80, you're talking about 1, 2, 3, or 4 potential additional bodies in order to keep up with the with this growth. And it's not always true that you can just work a little harder and do a little more and that you'll raise a little money. Sometimes it takes a little more investment. So I distinguish between the startups or the under-resourced, but also the larger shops, both of these groups being able to look at this outlook and say, maybe I can put a little more on the line and I'll benefit from putting a little bit more on the line. There's been a big switch in the foundation and corporate world. You know, those two, the foundation and corporate used to be always linked, and I think that goes way back to the start of the modern era in philanthropy, corporate and foundation. And many places now have broken corporate and foundation apart. And they've done so because they realize, first of all, there is a significant upside on the foundation side of things right now. And it's growing and it's going to continue to grow. But typically now what they figured out, and this is the imagery I want to give you, they found out that corporate officers, giving officers, need to look like corporate executives, and that foundation giving officers need to look like faculty. And it is in the understanding of the difference of the clear difference of the constituencies and the motivations and the reasons behind these two constituencies that there has now been a recognition that split it apart, put more investments certainly on the foundation side. I have found most university clients and others are underinvesting in the foundation area out of a lack of recognition of its growth and its continued growth. I think most importantly in the additional investments category, I put planned giving. I see that growth that Una predicts at 2% this year and 6% next year. I also think that that's where the big gifts are, generally speaking, even in the largest gifts from the proverbial billionaires. Most of those have a planned giving component. Almost every institution underinvests in planned giving, and what I'm saying here is that the Philanthropy Outlook says, hey, here's another reason to look at this area and to think that this is the greatest way to build a future endowment. And if you would look at the most established endowments in the country, they all started with the results of estate giving, whether it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 300 years ago in Harvard's case. So I pass that along to you with great encouragement. Finally, a little bizarre, but this Buffett-Gates challenge is it's out there, and I think the Philanthropy Outlook says that as we look at any of those characters that have signed onto the challenge, and if we have 1 or 2 degrees of separation from them, this is also going to be very good times for them. And I think that all of those indicators that Una gave profoundly affect the largest donors. And I would want to say keep an eye on that, and for an institution of any size. So those are my strategic responses to the Philanthropy Outlook. I want to now throw this back to Lori and ask Lori to suggest any questions that you all have had for either one of us, and that we have some adequate time to deal with them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael and Una. That was terrific. So, Una, I believe that your team has been watching the question box. So shall we allow them to read some of the questions aloud, and then you and Michael can respond in kind.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Melanie McKittrick, and I was the project manager on the Philanthropy Outlook, and I'm here with John Bergdahl, who is the lead statistician. And the first simple question, and this is for the Marson Lundy team, is, are the slides going to be available after the presentation?
Yes, we can make those available.
All right, great. All right, and this is a research question. How does household and nonprofit net worth increase or have a positive effect on household and individual giving? So,
yes. I can just provide a bit of an overview. So what we have seen in our models are that the household's economic and financial situation affects overall giving. And so how do we measure that? In past models, household incomes have been used, sometimes employment and so forth. But what we've seen is that more accurately, wealth is a better reflection of a household's economic and financial situation. Wealth affects sort of their economic well-being, not just today, but also in the future. And so that actually captures household finances, household economic situation, but also their sense of economic and financial security. So wealth we've seen as a better measure of what's going to happen in terms of giving behavior. When we look at the nonprofit net worth, that's a way of reflecting the health of the nonprofit sector overall and its contribution to overall giving. And so if you want to think about the response that donors have to what's going on in the nonprofit sector, we've modeled nonprofits in the overall picture as well. So that's a simple answer, but the report has the actual economic variables that are used in the model, but also the actual regression equations. So we hope that some people will be inspired to go and read the report and dive deeper into the numbers and actually see what the relative contributions of these different variables are the different sources of giving. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues here want to jump in as well.
Well, and this is Melanie, and it was a curious outcome for us. It's an interesting variable because when we incorporate household wealth and some of the other models we use for other reports, I mean, that's a simple, straightforward answer, but this particular variable incorporates nonprofit net worth, so we really had to think about, you know, what was happening there, and there could be an interesting kind of cyclical effect of nonprofits, particular nonprofits that are doing well, that have a positive effect on donor behavior, giving to those nonprofits, and therefore both are seeing increases. And this could also just simply reflect positive economic growth going forward in the future. Okay, so the second question is, are you not accounting for giving by donor-advised funds and trusts?
Yes, this is also another question that we get a lot. And so here we are looking at the donor types, and we've actually specifically outlined the role that individuals play, the role that foundations play, corporations, as well as the states. The challenge here is that we aren't looking at where those gifts go. And those are on, what we generally call the subsectors, the uses. That would be, does it go to a community foundation? Does it go to a healthcare institution, an educational institution, an arts institution? And so we hope in subsequent years to actually drill down into not just who's giving the dollars, but where are those gifts going. We'd also like, perhaps this is another wish list, to look at projections for giving vehicles. So, for example, have a growth rate for future donor advised funds so that nonprofit practitioners, leaders, and fundraisers can actually estimate, as Michael has said, how much should they invest in these different types of not just resources but also tools as options for their fundraising techniques.
Yeah, and this is Melanie, and just one other point. And you know, donor-advised funds have been, you know, very much very popular and very much on people's minds. But we have to keep in mind they still comprise roughly 3–4% of total giving. Although just a couple of years ago they comprised just about 2% of total giving. So that just shows how fast they are growing. But there's still a very slight aspect of total giving overall. That being said, they are approaching the total amount by corporate giving, which is about 5% every year. So that's why we are paying attention to this aspect, and in future years, hopefully we'll be incorporating this aspect into our models.
Yes. So one thing we'd like to perhaps incorporate is an actual estimate projected growth rate for donors advised funds. So stay tuned. That may be part of this outlook in the future.
And that was the last question. And we have a few minutes left if anybody has any additional questions to throw up into the chat box.
Well, with that in mind, I think we should also take this opportunity to thank all of you for spending so much of your time with us today. We've enjoyed hearing your questions, but we also want to encourage you as you review this material. The slides will be available following the presentation, but the full report is also available for your review. I think we'll be sending the link for that, and so please feel free to send us any follow-up questions or any additional materials. I think there are a few questions that have been targeted more to Michael as far as how individuals can use this material. I'm not sure, Michael, is somebody on your side keeping track of those?
I can certainly, this is Lori, we can certainly take a look at some. So here's, Michael, one person asks, it seems that many foundation mega gifts are intended to, quote, move the needle, so to speak, on a personal or political issue. And I suppose the question is, when you're speaking about the planned giving and the work with corporate and foundations, how does that tie into perhaps the what's going on in society in general? What kind of factors play into those kinds of gifts? Even in a situation where the economy predicts that gifts will be on the rise, there are clearly other factors at play.
Well, thank you, Lori. First of all, on the planned gift side, which I think is where most people can play, there is a growing recognition now with the aging of the baby boom that we are entering into the next wealth transfer. And I believe that wealth transfer, of course, the war generation wealth transfer has been pretty much completed. And there are signs that now the next one has begun. And we all know that as many of us baby boomers have aged, that everyone in Coke commercials keeps getting older. And the point here is that it's such a large bulge of people, and it is the manner in which people of modest estates and larger estates can make the gift that they've wanted to make all their lives. So I think that there's high societal impact here as it relates to this demographic. And I think that many places aren't quite up to the opportunity as it exists there. I think that the foundation world is, of course, there's such a variety of kinds of foundations, but so much of that now is in the program support and problem solving area. The whole area of academic research is fueled here. And the fueling of this, of course, gives great answers to societal problems. And family foundations and individuals are trying to emulate that. And I think it's a great it's a great attempt. And I think that whether it is helping to cure cancer or helping to figure out the food distribution at a food bank, these are great answers and of great help. And it's, again, so interesting in American society that we have risen to that. So I point that out. I think the corporate world is looking for ways that corporations can not only help a situation, but where corporations can help themselves. So I think there's a partnership and a recognition that goes along with that. And I think it's different than the old notion of corporate philanthropy. So I think things have changed there. Those are sort of the blending here of the practice and perhaps some of the motives that you asked about.
Yes, we had several questions come in, and I just want to address a few of them. We may not have time to address all of them. Specifically, a question around tax policy and its implications for the Philanthropy Outlook. The models that we've presented today do incorporate changes in tax policy over time, and I think the person who posed the question is actually right on by saying that the tax environment affects giving by households, also giving behavior by corporations, and many of the other donor types that we featured here. There's also the role that tax policy in terms of the timing of the gift. And so we have historical records shows us that tax policy, while it may not influence whether a donor gives or not, it does affect the nature, the timing of the gift, the mechanism, how the gift is made, and perhaps, as we said, the amount of the gift. And so paying attention to changes in policy, whether those affect estates, households, corporations, and foundations, I think is a very good idea, especially given the current policy debates we're having in the U.S. today. So that I think is a very good question. We also had a question come in around endowments and how projections around, especially for large universities, performance of the endowments, what are the implications for philanthropy? And I think that's where you may wonder, that is actually linked to incorporating the net worth, nonprofit net worth into the overall equation, being that donors are also responding to what's going on in the nonprofit environment, whether that's a positive response or a negative response. And the conditions facing the universities, the nonprofits more generally, are also very much a sign of what's going on in the overall economy. So we've modeled this as an overall system so that there is both positive as well as negative impacts going to the donor and back to the nonprofit institution. There are several other questions that just came in. We'll have to address these through the Q&A sheet that Laurie described. I think we're right at the hour now, so we're going to thank all of you once again for participating, and also special thanks to Martha and Lundy team for their very strong partnership and generosity throughout this project. Thank you all.